The call comes on a Sunday in early March, when the sky outside my apartment window is the particular shade of gray that can't decide if it wants to rain or not. I'm on my second cup of coffee, feet tucked under me on the couch, halfway through a novel I've been meaning to finish for 3 months. When my phone buzzes and I see my father's name on the screen, my first thought is, someone died. He doesn't call without reason. We're not that kind of family. We're not really any kind of family, not anymore. 4 times a year, maybe 5. Christmas, Easter, my birthday if he remembers it, and occasionally some random weeknight when my stepmother has worked herself into a state and needs him to perform normalcy by reaching out to the daughter she spent years trying to make invisible. I know the pattern. I've had 5 years to study it from a comfortable distance. I answer anyway. Callie. His voice sounds older than I expect, a little rougher around the edges. I need to talk to you about your grandmother's house. My grandmother had passed 8 weeks before that call. I knew she was gone. My cousin Zach had texted me the night it happened, knowing my father would wait too long or forget entirely. I'd cried alone in my car in the hospital parking lot after my shift, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My grandmother was the one person in that entire family who ever looked at me and saw me. Not a problem to manage, not a resource to deploy. Just me. I didn't go to the funeral. My stepmother would be there, and I couldn't give her the satisfaction of watching me grieve. What about it? I asked. There are some complications, my father said. We should probably talk in person. We didn't talk in person. We talked on the phone for 40 minutes while he danced around the actual point, which I eventually extracted piece by piece like pulling splinters. My grandmother's will left the house to me. My stepmother and my half-brother had been living there for 2 years. Just temporarily, my father kept saying, while they sorted some things out, and now they had nowhere to go. He wasn't asking me to sign anything, he said. He just thought family should discuss these things like adults. I said I'd think about it, and hung up. Then I pulled up my credit report. I don't know exactly what made me do it. Some instinct maybe. Something in the way my father kept using the word complications, without ever finishing the sentence. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and logged into the site I hadn't visited since paying off my student loans 18 months ago. I scrolled through my accounts with a growing stillness in my chest, the kind of stillness I've since learned to recognize as the feeling right before everything changes. There were 3 accounts I'd never opened, 2 credit cards and a home equity line of credit on my grandmother's house. Combined balance, a little over $41,000. The oldest account had been opened 4 years ago, the same month my stepmother moved herself and my half-brother into my grandmother's home. I closed the laptop, sat for a moment in the quiet of my apartment, then I opened it again and started looking for a real estate attorney. To understand why I wasn't more surprised, you have to understand what I grew up with. My mother died when I was 10. Ovarian cancer, fast and merciless. I remember the before and the after as 2 completely separate childhoods, like chapters in a book written by different people. The before was full. Her laugh in the kitchen on Saturday mornings, the way she let me help her garden even when I pulled up things that weren't weeds, the particular feeling of being completely known by another person. The after was quiet in ways that hurt. My father remarried when I was 12. He'd been lonely in the specific way that grief makes some people lonely. Desperate for structure, for someone to fill the silence my mother had left. My stepmother was organized and decisive, and she walked into our house and rearranged it within 6 months. Not just the furniture, everything. She never hit me. I want to be precise about that because the cruelty she practiced was the kind that leaves no marks, the kind specifically designed to make you question whether you're even being cruel to. It was the sigh when I walked into a room, the way she'd speak to my father in a low voice when she thought I couldn't hear, and then he'd come find me with a new set of rules. No friends over on weeknights. My weekend chores expanded until they weren't really chores anymore, just the ongoing maintenance of a household where I felt increasingly like a guest. When my half-brother was born, I was 14. I want to be fair. He was a baby, and babies don't choose their mothers, but he became the center of gravity in that house from the moment he arrived, and everything else orbited around him, including me. I picked him up from school when my stepmother had other commitments. I sat with him during thunderstorms. I helped him with his reading 3 nights a week for 2 years. My father called me so responsible, which I eventually understood was not a compliment but an explanation for why he didn't have to be. The breaking point came when I was 19. I'd earned a full scholarship to a state university 4 hours away. Nursing program, which I later switched to physical therapy, but that's beside the point. I'd applied without telling anyone, filled out the financial aid forms at the public library, written the essays on my phone during lunch breaks at my part-time job. When the acceptance letter came, I sat with it for 3 days before I told my father. He was proud. For about 48 hours, he was genuinely, visibly proud of me. It was the closest I'd felt to him since before my mother died. Then my stepmother sat him down. He came to find me with the look on his face that I'd learned to read like incoming weather. He was sorry, he said. He thought maybe I should defer for a year. My half-brother was going through a rough patch, some behavioral issues at school, and the therapist had recommended more stability at home, and my stepmother was stretched thin, and it would only be 1 year, and a scholarship like that would surely still be there. I packed a bag that night, one bag because my grandmother was in the driveway by morning. I never asked her to come. I'd texted her, not asking for anything, just needing to say the words to someone who would understand them. She called me within minutes and said, "I'll be there at 7. She drove 4 hours in the dark, helped me carry the bag to her car, and didn't say a word until we'd been on the highway for 20 minutes. "He loves you," she said then, "he's just a coward." I think about that a lot. Have you ever had someone put your situation into words so precisely it almost hurt? Like finally seeing clearly something you'd been squinting at for years? The attorney I found, Mr. Baines, was a compact man in his late 60s, with an office that smelled like old paper and the kind of organized chaos that suggests actual competence. He listened without interrupting while I laid out everything, which alone made me trust him. "The will is straightforward," he said when I finished. "Your grandmother had her own attorney, and the documentation is clean. The house belongs to you. The complication is the home equity line of credit. A HELOC uses the house as collateral. If the line had been fraudulently opened in my name, I had legal standing, but also a genuine mess to untangle before I could touch the property." "Can she face criminal charges for this?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "Identity fraud and forgery are both felonies. Whether that's the path you choose to pursue is a separate question from whether it's available to you." I left his office and drove directly to a credit union branch, where I spent 2 hours with a fraud specialist walking through every account. When she printed the original applications with my forged signature, I photographed every page on my phone. Then I drove home, made dinner, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. I had a full patient schedule the next morning. 3 days later, my stepmother showed up at my clinic. I work at an outpatient physical therapy practice. We share a building with 2 other medical offices, and the waiting room has a fish tank and watercolor prints, and the specific hushed quality of spaces where people are trying to recover from something. I was in the middle of a session when my colleague Cora knocked and cracked the door, with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "There's a woman at the front," she said carefully. "She's saying she's your mother." I've been in difficult situations before. Patients in serious pain, families making impossible choices. I've learned to keep my voice level when everything else isn't. I excused myself, told my patient I'd be right back, and walked out to the waiting room. My stepmother was dressed for performance. Silk blouse, good jewelry, the kind of outfit that says I am a reasonable woman who has been wronged. She had photographs in her hand, old family photos pulled from somewhere, and that detail hit me harder than I expected. The photographs were deliberate. She'd planned this down to the props. "Callie, please." Her voice was calibrated at just the right volume, loud enough for the waiting room to hear. "Your father is devastated, we're family. Look." She held up one of the photos. "Don't you remember this? Don't you remember how we used to be?" "This is my workplace," I said. "I know, I'm sorry, I just didn't know how else to reach you." She had my number. She'd had my number for 5 years. She chose this location because the location was the point, the audience, the performance, the hope that public shame would accomplish what private pressure hadn't. I turned to the front desk. "Can you call building security, please?" My stepmother's expression shifted just for a second in a way I recognized, the split second when a prepared script meets an uncooperative audience. Her eyes went shiny, her chin trembled. "You're going to have security remove your own mother?" "You're not my mother," I said quietly and only to her. "My mother is buried in Riverside Cemetery, you know that." Security escorted her out. I returned to my patient and finished the session. I drove home that evening and sat in my car for a few minutes with my hands in my lap. Then I went inside, made tea, and started making calls. The extended family messages started the next morning. My Aunt Peg, my father's older sister, someone I'd always thought I was on decent terms with, left a voicemail that opened with, "I don't want to take sides," and then spent 4 minutes taking sides. My stepmother had apparently been working the phones. The version of events making the rounds involved me being cold, ungrateful, and refusing to help the family in a time of crisis. There was talk of my abandoning my half-brother at a vulnerable age. Cousin Zach texted me, "Your stepmom called Mom crying, what's going on?" I told her I'd ask you directly. I texted back, "It's a long story, can I call you tonight?" He called me first. He listened without interrupting for almost an hour. At the end he said, "Jesus, Callie," and then, after a pause, "Send me what you have, I want to see the actual documents." I sent him the credit report screenshots, the account applications with the handwriting that wasn't mine. Not even close to mine, the loops and angles of someone else's hand masquerading as my signature. I sent him the timeline showing when the accounts were opened, relative to when my stepmother moved into my grandmother's house. "Does your dad know about this?" he asked. "I genuinely don't know what my dad knows," I said. "Has your family ever told a story about you that you almost didn't recognize yourself in? Like you were a character in someone else's narrative, written to serve their needs?" Mr. Baines arranged a meeting. I didn't want it at my father's house. That would have been walking into their stage set. So we met at his office, which was neutral ground, formal ground, the kind of place where certain performances are difficult to sustain. My father arrived looking smaller than I remembered. He's only 61, but he'd aged in the particular way some men age when they've spent years being managed by someone else, a kind of hollowing out, a subtle diminishment of whatever he used to be. My stepmother came in behind him and, I noticed immediately, didn't look at me when she entered the room. That was new, or maybe I just never had occasion to observe it before. My half-brother wasn't there. He's 16 now. I think about him sometimes, the kid I pulled out of thunderstorms, the one I sat beside for 2 years with a chapter book between us, and I feel something I can't fully name. Not anger, something more like sorrow with complicated edges. Mr. Baines laid out the situation without editorializing. The will, the clear transfer of property, the fraudulent accounts, the timeline, the forged signatures. He placed copies of the application documents in front of my father and slid them across the table with the particular patience of a man who has had this kind of meeting before. My stepmother said she'd never seen those documents. My father picked one up and looked at it for a long time. His jaw moved the way it used to when he was working hard to understand something. "That's not Callie's signature," he said. Not to my stepmother, to the document itself, like he was confirming something privately. "Of course it is." Her voice slipped into the patient, slightly pained register I knew so well, the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. "She probably opened those accounts and forgot. You know how she can be." "I have every financial document I've ever signed going back to when I was 18, I said. "I can put them side by side right now." Silence. My stepmother shifted in her chair. Her hand went to her chest. "Alan," she said, turning to my father, "I'm not feeling well, I think I need." "Sit down," my father said. It wasn't loud, he didn't raise his voice, but she sat down. I'd spent years imagining what it might feel like if my father ever, even once, chose the harder thing. I'd built entire versions of that moment in my head, rehearsed it, dreamed about it. The real version was quieter and stranger than anything I'd imagined. He just looked at the documents and then looked at his wife, and something moved across his face that I recognized, distantly, as grief. "What do you need from us?" he asked, and he was looking at me. 90 days to vacate the property," I said. "The HELOC gets handled through the fraud dispute process. I won't pursue criminal charges as long as the exit is clean and the house is left in the same condition it was before they moved in." I paused. "If there's any further contact at my workplace, or pressure through family members, that calculus changes. Those are the terms." He nodded, just once, slowly. My stepmother cried. Real tears, or close enough that the distinction stopped mattering. My father didn't reach for her hand. The 90 days passed. There was one message from Aunt Peg once she'd heard the fuller version of events. Awkward and stumbling, the kind of apology that's as much about the person giving it as the person receiving it. I accepted it without elaborating. Cousin Zach drove out and helped me change the locks on the last day. He brought sandwiches, and we sat on my grandmother's back porch eating them, and he told me she'd talked about me constantly in her final years. That she'd told him, more than once, she always meant the house to go to me. "She worried about you," he said, "but she also always said you'd figure it out." She was right, I said. The house smelled like her when I walked through it alone for the first time. Lavender and cedar and old books. A combination I couldn't have described in advance but recognized instantly, the way you recognize a voice in a crowd. I stood in her kitchen for a long time before I did anything else. I just stood there and breathed. The credit fraud dispute took 4 months to fully resolve. All 3 accounts were removed from my report. I consulted with Mr. Baines about civil action and decided, after sitting with it, to let it rest. Not because my stepmother had earned leniency, but because litigation would require me to stay entangled, and I had already spent enough of my life orbiting someone else's damage. My father texts occasionally. Short messages, careful and a little formal, like someone who isn't sure of the rules yet. Hope work is good, how are you doing? He came in October to help me move a bookshelf, and we spent 3 hours talking about nothing much. A podcast he'd been listening to, a show I was watching, the neighbor's dog who keeps digging under the fence. It was the longest conversation we'd had about ordinary things since I was a child. When he left, he hugged me at the door, and I let him. My half-brother sent me a message on my birthday, 2 sentences. Happy birthday. Hope you're doing good. I wrote back, thank you. I hope you are too, I meant it. He's 16 and didn't choose any of this. My stepmother has not contacted me. I find I don't think about her often. What I think about more is the garden, which had gone half wild during the 2 years the house was occupied by people who didn't tend it. Cora came over one Saturday in April and helped me clear it out. We worked for 5 hours, and when we finished, we sat on the back steps with cold drinks and looked at what we'd uncovered. Rose bushes, lavender, a persimmon tree I hadn't known was there. My grandmother used to say some things survive neglect better than you'd expect. That they go quiet, not dead. That they're just waiting for someone to pay attention again. I think she was talking about the garden. I think she might have been talking about other things too. There are evenings when I sit in her kitchen with a cup of tea and the quiet settles around me, and I think about the girl who packed a single bag at 19 and waited in the dark for headlights in the driveway. I was so certain I was losing something then, the family I'd kept hoping might still become real, the father who might still choose me, the belonging I'd been chasing since I was 10 years old. What I actually lost was the waiting, the constant low-grade ache of being almost seen. What I found instead was this house, this garden, the specific peace of a Sunday morning with no one demanding anything. Cora arriving on Saturdays with coffee, Zach calling on holidays, my father's careful text landing on my phone and me deciding each time whether to answer and what to say. If someone has only ever called you when they needed something, after years of silence, after years of absence, what would you do with that call? Would you answer? Would you give them the chance to tell you who they'd become, or would you trust who they'd already shown you? I don't have a universal answer, I only know mine. Not every loss turns out to be a loss. Some of them are just the last quiet click of a door closing on something that was already over, finally letting the stillness in, finally giving you room to figure out who you are when no one else is defining it for you. I think my grandmother understood that. I think that's exactly why she left me the house.